the housing crisis in Australia. Now, this is just ridiculous. Now, look, however you sit politically is okay. And I don't mean to run a political, channel or anything like that here. This is purely property investment, property buying, if it's a house you want to live in or your best place to retire, anything like that. Now, what I'd say is this housing crisis is just going to continually get worse. Now, politics aside, really neither of the major parties or any of the major parties really in Australia knows how to resolve it. And all they try to do is they try to fix it, but they end up deepening it. Now, look, fundamentally, I think the reason for this is because victimhood in our current society has become actually a currency. Now, what happens is basically you got people like the Greens and Labor especially who think, the average investor is an evil capitalist who just wants to make money off, renting a house out to other people. And it's just not the truth. And continually over the course of the last couple of years, and mind you, it's not only Labor and the Greens, Liberal parties probably know better at that. They further disincentivise property investing. And what that has done is it's just further deepened the crisis. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. Now, let's go into some more detail with that. But anyway, first things first, one of the major reasons is this poor fiscal policy. Now, look, I've got a couple of things here that I'd like to show you. But first things first, here's an example. In 2015, APRA came out, and basically what they did was they put further buffers on investors, especially against defaults. Now, don't get me wrong, we do have a AAA, I think, rated credit system from memory worldwide, which is excellent. But, the emphasis of taking care of yourself, in my opinion, should be on the individual, not basically the government. Now, if the government obviously wants someone to, buy a rental property, add to the rental pool, that's great. But all they're doing here is simply, creating worse and worse and worse incentives for people to get in, and it's actually making lending harder. Now, all this did was actually make, stock go down and more people flee out of the market, which, it's just bad. And it's actually bad for our country in general. Here's another one. In 2017, after the Royal Commission, basically what they did was they further tightened residential lending, especially on investors again, because they thought it was too risky. Now, you had some banks come out and, to be honest, do the wrong thing 100%, but further tightening the market was even more stupid. Now, look, both of these came in the midst of the boom for both Sydney and Melbourne. So between 2014 and 2017, Sydney and Melbourne did exceptionally well. And what happened there really was that APRA came out, and the government especially came out with both rhetoric and also policy here that targeted in especially investors, despite Sydney and Melbourne not being the entire part of Australia. So it kind of killed the whole market, just especially in 2017, where, you had places like Brisbane and Perth that really needed just places for people to rent. But anyway, the government does what they do. And yeah, that's some of the reasons. Further reasons, increased stamp duty. Over time, you can see in the 90s here that stamp duty was around, only a month or so's worth of income. So now, especially Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, you can see here, you're looking at probably minimum 5 to 6 times your income, which is just ridiculous. And, government likes to do things like this. I think from memory, I think it's their highest revenue stream out of anything, to be honest. But anyway, increasing in stamp duty is only going to make deposits harder for people. And, you don't need any numbers. Well, you can look at the numbers, but, it's very common sense. But anyway, there you go. Further reasons. Now, I hate to say this, and I do feel really sorry for Victorians, but increased land tax, not only in Victoria, it's also other states too. And it's not necessarily that they're changing the rate that land tax is valued at, but it's what's happening is they're purposely valuing land tax at significantly more than what it should be worth. So you might have, for example, property values have gone up in between the years of, let's say, 2020 and 2022 in places of Brisbane, and it might have gone up, let's say, 30%, but they're increasing your land value by 50 or more percent. Now, I don't know how they can actually justify that, but somehow they are. And yeah, it's just causing people to pay more and more money to the government, which is then therefore pushing people away from actually investing in the market. So anyway, another one here is, and I feel really sorry for Victorians because that Dan Andrews government, I'm not necessarily putting down like, you know, consistently the Labor Party or I'm boosting up the Liberal Party, but some of these policies that are brought out like this, increasing the land tax because of your actual fuck up in the start of it, that is your fault, and you should not tax people more because of that. What you should be doing is creating a more sustainable economy and actually creating an economy that is more efficient and therefore is more profitable and makes more money, because it is your fault, not the people. Now, anyway, but what they've decided to do is increase land tax. Now, what that's done is it's not actually only residential land tax, it's actually commercial too, which is even more stupid, because what you're then going to do is you're going to make actual businesses be able to employ less people, and some maybe even shut down. If you've got your small to medium enterprise there that wants to run and can't afford, let's say, 4% or increase in land tax because they're running at 2% margins, you're just getting rid of people that are then that would have jobs and then are probably going to have to go on a welfare or really struggle to pay either their rent or mortgages, and it just creates more stress. It's just ridiculous. And you know, furthermore, what's happened here is investors have then also just been sick of all these, you know, punches in the face, and they've just abandoned the market. So that's another reason. Furthermore, let's go to another one. And look, I find this absolutely ridiculous because, you know, if this isn't, if what I've shown you isn't enough, how can someone who is publicly elected decide on policies like this when it is so simple? This is all publicly available information here. All of it you can find online. I don't have a back channel, or not in bed with any of the political parties or anything like that. But they could find this online in next to half an hour, all of this information. They still do this. But anyway, increased rental legislation, that's another one. So rules against rent bidding, that's one. I know, for example, too, like another thing that they're looking to do as well is make absolute maximum caps on the amount that rent can go up in a year. Now, all that's doing is really that what it is I understand the idea against rent bidding because, look, you don't want, for example, areas where, like, you know, students from very wealthy backgrounds just come in and pay, you know, a couple $100 above market. Now, I have a really good friend, and I feel sorry for people like this, who is from the Riverina region, and he, you know, has to rent in Sydney because he can't afford to buy. He doesn't have any, wasn't given any handouts, and, you know, people don't understand this, but renting in your fundamentally good areas is very expensive. And I think they previously rented for something around $700 a week, but then since COVID, it's gone up to, I think, more than $1,100 a week. And now this is a 3-bedroom unit in Ashfield. It's not even like your Cremornes, your, you know, McMahon's Point. It's not your Point Piper or anywhere like that. How is the average person supposed to afford that? Now, I know it probably sounds like I'm arguing for increased rental legislation, but I'm actually not. I'm saying that rental bidding, what it is it's a supply problem. So if you had, for example, 100 people looking for a home and only, let's say, not only, but let's say in a fairer market, let's say 70 homes available or something like that, homes are probably going to go for naturally good, you know, I'd say fair prices. So naturally, you know, prices won't rise as much. But if you've got people being disincentivized by things like this that are fundamentally out of the control of the landlord, all they're going to do is just abandon it and then either invest in a business or invest in the stock market. They might put their money in a Vanguard fund or a managed fund or something like that. And then furthermore, it's bought by an owner-occupier, and then you have less stock in the market. But anyway, I guess it helps some of these political parties, you know, get some votes, which is by the screaming minority. But anyway, is what it is. Anyway, let's go on to the next one. Now what we do is, especially in the media, and I hate to say it, but the media is full of just unqualified people. Look at what's happened really since COVID. I remember media outlets coming out saying property would fall by 30 and 40%, but it increased in the same year by 30%. So they're what, 60 or 70% wrong? How do you still have a job if you're 60 or 70% wrong? Like, you have a title of being an actual journalist to get that right, but you're getting it that wrong. And now, what they furthermore do is they then demonize the investors. And I hate to say it, but the actual investor, you're actually solving a national crisis. You're actually going out and you were, creating stock for someone to live in. You're putting shelter over someone's head. So you actually, in my eyes, should be incentivized to do that, because the government can't provide all of that. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But anyway, look, close to 72% of Australians only own one investment property, and the average actual investor, believe it or not, is just a median income earner, often a mum and dad. So what, are you going to put a mum and dad who's been working for 30 years just to afford the property to invest in their future and not be on, for example, Centrelink, not to be on, welfare or anything like that? Are you going to say, you've done the wrong thing, let's tax you more for doing the right thing? All you're doing is disincentivizing an actual goal set, an aspirational person who's taken actual money out of their own funds to not make you pay for things in the future, but you want to disincentivize them. And the media does the exact same thing and demonizes them. So that is, in my view, that's absolutely pathetic, and that needs to stop. And any media outlet that wants to do that should be shut down immediately. Maybe not shut down immediately, but all the viewers should really just stop watching it, because it's just giving attention to unqualified people. But anyway, they need their attention too. But anyway, on to your next thing. Let's give you some statistics just purely on what's actually true about the market, okay? So despite the noise, 30% of dwellings in Australia have been rented. Now, that's for over 70 years. So that's actually since literally the 1950s. Now, these include all families, singles, students, and also professionals. Now, what the media likes to say is it's greedy landlords going behind everyone and just taking money off the family that doesn't have any money. Well, if that's true, does that also count for the doctor who's on a locum, who might move, for example, out to somewhere like, let's say, Dubbo, because there's a shortage of doctors? Let's say out to Batlow, let's say out to Roma or Surat, let's say out to Shepparton. Does it include them? Does it include the farm workers who we so desperately require out in your rural communities? No, it doesn't. But it suits the rhetoric of these idiot political parties. So, they go behind that. Now, also, the government only provides 8% of the total rental stock on market. Now, if you want to actually make it out that you do a lot for the country and you only own 8% of the total rental stock on market, but 92% is provided by the private market, I do not know why people listen to you, and I do not know why other people do not look at these things. Now, if you looked at these things, you would just literally ignore everything the government says, which you almost should do in this sphere, because they clearly don't know what they're talking about. It's as simple as that. Now, let's go to some more statistics just to show you how poor the government is at doing things like this. Now, in 1976, the government had 300,000 dwellings owned that were available for rent. So that includes your federal, state, and territory governments, right? Now, today, and that is literally 50 or so years later, it has the same number. Now, since 2015, believe it or not, there has been 3 million people come into Australia, and that's the population increase of Australia, 3 million people. Now, you would think that especially since 2015, and especially even worse since 1976, you would have an increase of rental properties. But here's your statistics. Now, look, this is actually so bad for the country. But anyway, let's go to them. Now, over this course of time, we had in 2015, with 3 million less people, 72,000 properties available for rent. Now, today, there are 30,000 properties available for rent. Now, if you don't believe me, let's just have a look at this at the next graph. Now, this is nationally. Now, if you look at this is your stock on market rental listings. Now, you can see before 2015, you had a fair bit of growth there, but we also had population growing. So that's, now these rental listings, again, are mostly provided, as I gave you the statistics, by the private market. Again, so 92% of the private market of rental listings are from the private market. Now, only, as I said, only 8% from the government, and that number stayed the same in total, in terms of total listings, since 1976. So it's the private market that's actually providing it up to 2015. You can see it there, the total stock go basically stagnant. And then you can see, especially since COVID, with more idiotic policies, it go further down. Now, that's just crazy. Now the government could literally just go onto SQM and have a look at this and think, oh, I'm a bit quack, I don't know what I'm doing, and I stuffed up. And that's what they should do. But they need to win votes from people that don't look at anything. So good on them. But anyway, now probably furthermore to this is, look, probably I've explained what the government's done wrong, but I probably need to explain what they need to do to get this right. And anyway, look, an easy way to describe this is probably vacancy rates. Now, vacancy rates are basically, it's basically the amount of people that are looking for properties on the market as to how many properties on the market are available. Now, what an even vacancy rate looks like is somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. Now, if you'd like to know what the average vacancy rate at the moment in Australia is, it's somewhere around that 1% mark. Now, 2% is undersupplied, 1% is critically undersupplied. So basically what that means is any property that comes to market is snapped up immediately. Now, that is a terribly bad thing for Australia. And look, if you want to know in terms of an even vacancy rate of between 2.5% and 3%, how many dwellings we would need available, the number would be in advance of 200,000 dwellings. Now, want to know something more? Now, we've got 30,000 dwellings on market. 30,000 dwellings on market for rent at the moment, and for it to be even, we need 200,000 dwellings. Remember that when you go to, especially for renting, or even if you actually genuinely care about Australia, remember that when you go to vote next time, because it truly is just it's a disaster. Now, to tell you how much of a disaster this is, no one is actually going to believe this next thing. And then what I'll say is, so look, most people would agree that, housing in the United States is a massive homelessness problem. Now, you want to know what Australia's homeless numbers are? Here you go. Australia has a homelessness rate per capita of 2.5 times that of the United States. So if you see videos on the news, and that could be any news station, no matter how you sit politically, whatever you think, Australia on average has a 2.5 times percent, it says 2.5% times more the homelessness rate than that of the United States. That is insane. That is absolutely crazy. And if you want to actually go and find that, go and look under bridges in Brisbane. Go and look at the back of suburbs in parts of Perth. Go and look at out in the suburbs of Sydney, and out in areas, for example, close to shelters under bridges. Look at that, and it's just a joke. It's crazy what is going on. And this is Australia. Like when I was a kid, I couldn't believe. Like I remember, the middle class being a really, fundamentally strong thing. And like, what's going on is just, it's disgusting, and the government really needs to do something about it. But anyway, as I discussed before, here's your national vacancy rate. As I said, it's around 1%. Again, look at what happened from 2015, stagnant, still undersupplied, but slightly undersupplied, but still stagnant. Look what happened since COVID. So, yeah, thank you, politicians, for that, and the government. Furthermore, let's have a look at the average household size. So you can see here that we had a fairly stagnant household size in Australia since sort of, the 2008 sort of time, right through, I'd argue about sort of 2018, 2019. Then you had a bit of a drop before COVID, then it went back up simply because of the students leaving. Now, look what's happened since then. Now, if you've got let's say the same amount of households. So if you've got the same amount of households, right, or dwellings, should I say, that are available, but you've got less people in each household, naturally there needs to be more demand to cover these households. But in saying that, what's happened is we don't have any more households, but we need more households just simply on the average household size. So that adds furthermore to the actual issue. Now, let's go to some policies that the government has promised, but let's see if they'll actually deliver on them. Here we go. What about the million homes in 5 years plan? I think it might even be 1.2 million, but depending on the media source, you will see different numbers. But let's call it a million just to be safe. Now, they're already behind on this number. Okay, so at the moment, the government said we're going to build in excess of 200,000 dwellings. Now, depending on the reports you look at, they're probably projected to do somewhere around 140,000 homes this year. So they're already behind by 60,000. But again, remember the number I said earlier, the dwellings we'd need for rent would be in excess of $200,000. So even if we're being conservative there, you would need $200,000 when we've got $30,000 of 30,000 homes available for rent. Now, that's 170,000 short. So you add, let's say they're already short of their, they're already short of their 200,000 dwellings, and they've only got 140,000 dwellings. That there alone is 60,000. Then again, you've got 170,000 dwellings already short. There you go, 230,000. Furthermore, builders are collapsing as well. So here's a recent report only a couple of days ago. Collier Homes collapses under liquidation. Crisis hits Aussie builders. Again, you want to tax people more. You want DAs to be longer. You want extended land tax. You want every red hoop there is in Australia. And commercial rates are expensive. It's not easy to be in the building industry. Your gross realisation values are so tight at the moment. You want to support these guys. Don't stop literally this idiotic socialism, tax people more, give it to people who don't try to contribute to the country. Policies, it's just stupid. Anyway, here we go. Next, let's just be honest here now. Okay, so we've got measures of success. So what do people actually want to need? Now, 98% of dwellings that are purchased are actually existing dwellings. They're not new dwellings. Now, the issue with that is most of the existing dwellings, most of the demand goes into existing places where the jobs and infrastructure are. So regardless of if the government could actually say we're going to build 50 million homes, right? But the fact of the matter is if they're not in the locations where people want to live and where demand is, none of that matters. They could build 50 homes in remote WA in the Simpson Desert or the Gibson Desert. It's not the Simpson, sorry, the Gibson's in WA, right? But if no one wants to live there, they'll all stay vacant and the same demand will be there and the same shortage will be there in the exact locations where people want to live. Now, again, as I said earlier, new estates appeal to very few people. Now, because of that, no one wants to live there, especially educated people do not want to live there. Now, because of that, most of the new dwellings are in new estates and simply speaking, the demand isn't there. Now, the measure that the government should be looking at isn't simply as well. So they've already wrong in that circumstance, but what's happened here is they're saying we're going to build these dwellings, and building isn't necessarily an accurate measure. The accurate measure they need to look at is two very simple measures, and it's how many homes are available to rent and how many are available to be bought. And now, simply speaking, it is because if you've got an apartment block, let's say of 10, a small Art Deco apartment block has been built, and so 10 dwellings. If you have, for example, let's say, I don't know, all of them that have been built that they're not actually available to rent, it's not actually increasing the supply that then actually suffices some of that demand. That's the issue. So if you're saying we've built 140,000 dwellings, but none of them are stationed, none of them have the actual services that are needed to be there, none of them also have all the fixtures and fittings or been actually, should I say, passed by the actual building commission, then it doesn't even count to the thing either. So anyway, there we go. That's another thing that you probably want to know. I'll just share that screen so everyone can see the actual dot points that I was talking about. Anyway, furthermore, Let's go to the next point. Councils, red tape, and NIMBYs. 1.3 million homes blamed on councils' NIMBY. So what this basically is a lot of people, a NIMBY is not in my backyard, that's what it means. There's a lot of councillors who are against this. There's also a lot of locals who are against this. Now, I hate to say this, but I am also probably, I'd say, a light NIMBY. I think near great transport infrastructure, you probably should have higher densities, no doubt. But I think also, you know, to create the, not create, but maintain the Australian way, I think having a backyard's a beautiful thing. And now, look, I grew up in a working class household, not a wealthy household at all, but a very standard, I think 400 or so meters squared family home. And, I loved it, playing in the backyard. It's the Australian way. It's the Australian dream. So I think what we need to do to suffice this is, along our transport infrastructure, we need to make sure that we have the right density, and we also not only have one, the parking, and two, not only that, but also the infrastructure, shops and services that are required for our actual Australians to live in. And not only that too, but we should also think about regional centres. Now, a lot of regional centres are actually, funny enough, probably not as NIMBY as some of the inner city council regions, in saying that a lot of them actually would really welcome, some more services. Like, I've got family in the Northern Rivers, and I know a lot of them, whilst they don't want their complete farmlands, destroyed and that kind of thing, a lot of them would love for a good medical precinct. A lot of them would also love for, some really good shops, low-key shops in the area. A lot of them would love for maybe even some apartment blocks for the younger individuals who need to buy them up. There's just no stock available. But we really need to think of this and think about the future of our country, because if we don't, I really worry about Australia. And to be honest, it's becoming a really divisive topic, and it's really bad. But anyway, that's another thing. Now, look, if the government really wants to say that, or demonise investors more, and say that that's a true fact, I'll give you something here. Now, the fact that $50 billion today or more is spent on the aged pension proves that Australians don't take their future seriously. Now, what you need to do is you need to incentivise aspirational people who want to take care of their future, so we don't have this burden of social security that is put on Australia and therefore doesn't get reinvested into our economy. Now, if you don't do that, this number, and you can see this is literally 5 years ago or so, this number's continued to rise, and it's actually got even worse, right? So again, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this is basically what's happened. Now, let's go further into this. Now, people used to live a lot shorter. Now, people are living longer and longer and longer. Now, this is since 1970. Now, look at what's happened. The average person in 1970 lived a touch over 70 years old, about 71 to 72 years of age. Now, the average person now is 83.3 years old in Australia. That was actually in 2021. It's probably even higher now. Now, what this isn't taking into consideration is the average Australian who's actually over 50 actually lives to around 93 to 95 years old. Now, you're not on the pension till you're over 60 years old anyway. So if you think about that, you're probably going to need somewhere around 30 years worth of either welfare, so that's government pension, or self-sufficiency to survive. Now, because we have an aging population, what's going to happen is we're going to continually need to fund more and more money into this fund, or not fund, but into our tax dollars into the pension and welfare because of this. Now, if the government really cared, what they would do is incentivize people to actually get into investing, so there's no requirement for an age pension, and we can actually spend that money back into our economy. But anyway, again, as I said, I don't know if the government would ever actually value doing anything about it, because their decisions for most of the years I've been alive have been very poor. But anyway, next slide. Now I've got, look, not next slide, but I'll actually share some genuine thoughts on this actual topic. Now, look, in saying all of this, the government needs to know, and actual providers need to know, that's both state, territory, and federal, that investing is discretionary. It's not mandatory by law. If you're disincentivizing someone to do something, they're not going to invest. It's as simple as that. If you said to me, for example, if you walk down the road, which is 5 minutes away, instead of driving, you'll make $100. You'll probably walk down the road. If you say, for example, that I'll charge you, let's say $5 to walk down the road, but you could drive down the road, for example, then you're probably just going to drive, right? It's the same thing as saying, if the government said, please invest in your future and I will incentivize you to do so, people are probably going to invest in their future. But if you say, we're going to slap you with land tax, higher council rates, we're going to slap you with, higher stamp duty, then people are going to be less incentivized to do it. And that's just what's creating the crisis. Now, furthermore, look, in my view, it would take, if every correct decision was made by the government to fix this crisis, I think it would take somewhere between 3 and 4 years to fix. Now, that is absolutely crazy in my view. However, look, that's what's going to happen, and I hate to say it, but I really don't have any faith in anyone, especially in government, without radical change to do this. So it's just going to continually get worse. Now, what it's become a very divisive political topic. Now, the reason being is because you've got a whole generation that can't afford property unless they have help, are basically an entrepreneur or very high up in an industry earning maybe $300,000, or they have family money that can help them out. Now, look, it's not a healthy thing for the country. It's actually shocking. And I, really worry about the future of Australia. Now, anyway, let's go on to what I actually genuinely think of this. Now, here we go. Immigration numbers. And now this is going to annoy probably a lot of people, but I think it's important to share it for everyone because, I just want it to be pure and honest and actually show people what's going on. So if you look here, this is the most recent release that I could find. The annual growth rate of people has been 659,800 in total, so that's 2.5%. And the migration numbers have been made up close to 550,000. Now, do you think logically that that's a good idea for Australia to bring in, when we have such a bad housing crisis, this many people? I'm sure you can answer that question. The answer is an obvious no. Now, what do we do about this? Look, we have to stem immigration. We have to invest in people that are going to create dwellings to help this crisis. It's as simple as that. It's not rocket science. Now, even worse, we have other political people that get involved and do things like this and suggest things like this. So this is one of the members of Parliament. He's suggesting rent freezes, which, as I've already described for quite a while, that's only going to exacerbate it. And I think he's even described from memory as well that he wants to put a very low cap on what a rent could be in the future too, which is just absolutely ridiculous in my view. Like, that's unbelievable. And, my imagination is, if that was to actually happen, you probably have average vacancy rate, in my view, maybe shrink from 1% to somewhere between 0.5 and maybe, let's call it 0.5, maybe 0.7%. Between 0.5 and 0.7% probably would be the number if they put rent freezes in. So it's just ridiculous. And that then, again, would create less stock, put more pressure on the government to spend more money on welfare, which then means less money to investment, which then in the long run will actually make it a worse fundamental country in terms of its finances and also in terms of homelessness. That just go even out the door. We might even be 3 or 4 times that of the United States. But anyway, he needs to win votes, out of the screaming minority, as a lot of these parties do. But anyway, there you go. Now, look, I know this sounded like quite, should I say, I wouldn't say disincentivizing, but what I'd say is maybe it sounds like a little bit, bad. It might sound like I'm being a little bit negative to an extent, but I don't mean it that way. But there's actually some really positive things to this. Now, look, the most positive thing I can tell you out of this, and I'll go straight back into it, is that, look, it's a great time to be an investor because look, you're actually helping a national emergency. And I'll tell you right now, if you're an investor, you are doing more than any government in Australia has done for probably, like, I'd say something along the lines of maybe 15 years or something like that. So if you want to know who actually does more for the housing in Australia, it's you if you become an investor. Now, not only that too, but you would be rewarded with both capital growth and rental growth for years to come. Now, I'm not doing this not saying that to take the piss out of people who rent or anything like that, or owners, but there's clearly a shortage. Australia has a great economy. We have the highest net worth per capita, aside from Singapore and the United Arab Emirates, of any major country in the world. So there's going to be a shortage for years to come, and excess demand from a very wealthy demographic. So you're very lucky to live here, and if you have the opportunity to get in, simply just get in. That's with my advice. Now, finally, look, aspirational people receive aspirational results in life. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, look, people, through freedom, people feel very rewarded. Now, what I mean by that is, if things go wrong in your life, that's probably the first thing I'll start with. You can get out of situations. Now, hypothetically, let's say, for example, you own a property to live in, and you might own one investment, for example. Now, you might have an elderly mother who unfortunately gets kicked out of her property that she's been living in for so long, and will be out on the street if she doesn't have somewhere to live. Now, if you invest in your future, you may even be able to help her in the future and let her stay in your property for a couple of months until she finds that property she needs, just to get her back on her feet. Now, that's a very sort of, I'd say, emotional and very sort of charismatic, I'd say, thing to do, but it's something that you could genuinely do it and help a family member or something like that. Another thing that but another aspirational thing that someone might receive is that, look, in the future, you might have a family, and you might have, let's say kids, and let's say you have one kid, and the average income to get into the property market might be, I don't know, let's call it $300,000, which probably might even be realistic in the future with the way things are going. It might be $200,000. Now, if you could help that person out, or that your child out, you would feel so rewarded by that, it's not even funny, right? Even so, you might even, for example, sell down one of your investments and live off just the income for life. Therefore, you wouldn't be too reliant on the pension. You might, not only that too, you would be actually giving the government more money to spend in the right areas. Now, that's something that people should look at. Now, whether they do or not, it's probably up to them. But if you really want to do something with your life, the opportunity is just there to go and take it. So that's the biggest thing that I'm striving for people to do here. But anyway, look, I do hope that everyone understands that it is a great time to be an investor, and it's actually a great time to help a national emergency in our housing crisis. Now, please, if you can do to help the crisis, and secondly, if you don't and the governments continue to actually do what they're doing, and this is actually a word to the governments, if any of them actually see this, you're actually creating even more social unrest than anything I can think of in the country. Now, I've thought about this so much, and I don't even know if this may happen, but I think that if this continued to happen, it could create something along the lines of the divide, almost like a civil war. Now, I don't mean to insinuate anything by that, but what I mean is it's actually becoming so divisive and politically motivated that genuinely the government needs to step in, and they need to actually do something about it. And with 92% of dwellings coming from individuals, it's actually not up to the government, it's up to us to change this. Now, hopefully the government can understand this and actually incentivize people to help the situation. So anyway, that's my view on it. And look, I hope people are happy to help out, and the government is too. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to this channel, and if you're looking to purchase a property in Australia's best performing suburbs, be sure to reach out via www.compoundinvest.com.au. The details are below. Thanks again, and welcome to the channel. I'll see you on the next one.